Federation Press Center. Russian and foreign correspondents are in touch with us online. So, we start with the schedule of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov. As we said at the previous briefing, on October 11th in Laos, the city of Vientiane, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia will take part in the 19th East Asian Summit. Let me remind you that this platform is part of the ASEAN mechanism system and has always been one of the key elements. The architectures of multilateral dialogue and cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region built around it. We will publish additional material on this subject on our feeds on MIT's website, in social networks. And a number of bilateral meetings are also planned with the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, about which we will promptly inform you. Let's move on to the current international agenda. The situation is the current in fusion and in general in the Middle East. I would like to remind you that exactly 1 year ago, on the 7th of October, 2023, a bloody terrorist attack was committed against Israeli citizens, which claimed the lives of civilians. This was followed by a chain of monstrous bloody events in the Middle East as a whole. To date, tens of thousands of people have died over the past year. Most of them are people who have become victims. Victims from all sides, while being peaceful citizens. There are many children, women, and elderly people among them. And all this against the background of endless pouring oil on the fire from the West, and again, attempts by the West at any cost to block attempts, including by our country and the entire sane international community, to transfer this conflict from a flaming phase to a political and diplomatic settlement channel during the year. And the destructive activity of the United States of America, Britain, and their satellites in the United Nations Security Council is an example and proof of this. We have regularly commented on the situation in the region, including due to the fact that we are talking about Russian citizens as well. A lot of questions were also received for today's briefing on the current situation of the infusion, the Israeli aggression in this country, despite calls for a ceasefire and protests by members of the international community, continues. Every day, Israeli Air Force planes launch massive rocket and bomb attacks. Hundreds of reconnaissance strike drones are operating in the skies over southern Lebanon day and night. The Israeli armed forces are not hitting Lebanon blindly. The targets are the alleged locations of Hezbollah's weapons, its fighters and commanders, the military and even civilian infrastructure of the Shiite movement, including medical centers, media centers. We see how international humanitarian law has been violated. The cynicism and tragedy of the situation also lies in the fact that some of the attacks fall on densely populated neighborhoods of Beirut and other cities. At the same time, the Israeli military absolutely does not take into account the so-called, it's scary to pronounce this term, which came to us from the West, concomitant civilian casualties during the bombing on September 27th of this year, as a result of which the leader of Hezbollah was killed. 6 multi-story residential buildings with everyone who was there at that time were literally turned into a mountain of rubble. Warnings addressed to the Lebanese about the need to leave a particular area are of the most general nature. They are basically useless. As a result, the number of civilian casualties is several times higher than the losses in the ranks of the Shiite movement fighters. More than 1 million residents of southern Lebanon have become internally displaced persons. 400,000 people managed to cross the border of neighboring Syria before the Israeli Air Force destroyed the road surface near the Masna border crossing with a targeted strike, thereby blocking transport links between Beirut and Damascus. The ground invasion of Lebanon, which Israel announced on September 30th, is still stalling. The Israeli military raids on Lebanese territory end in fierce clashes with Hezbollah fighters with sensitive losses. According to our estimates, the Shiite Hezbollah party, including its military wing, has not lost its manageability and shows organization. At the same time, I emphasize once again, because it is necessary to see how many victims among the civilian population these clashes lead to. Let me remind you that Russia was one of the first to send a shipment of humanitarian aid to Beirut on October 3rd of this year. The return flight of the Ministry of Emergency Situations carried out a partial removal of family members of employees of the embassy and other foreign institutions. We view the Lebanese direction as one of the elements of the current unprecedented escalation in the Middle East and strongly condemn any forceful actions aimed at fanning a region-wide conflagration. We express, I will say it again, we have said it repeatedly, we express our sympathy to everyone who has suffered. We express our sincere condolences to the families and friends of the victims, all who died this year. We are in favor of an early ceasefire. It is in this that we see the sincerity of our condolences and sympathy. We see how many literally burst into tears in public while continuing to inflate the conflict. We stand for its political and diplomatic settlement on the basis of an international legal framework. We are speaking out because of the soonest adventure of fire directly infusing, as well as in neighboring countries. For us, the political and diplomatic settlement of the existing contradictions, on the basis of finding a balance of legitimate interests, proceeding from the universal principle of universal and equal security, is of priority importance, and we are always determined to strengthen coordination of relevant efforts with international and regional partners. I would also like to comment on another strike, an Israeli strike on Damascus. It took place last night on the 8th of October. Once again, Israel has grossly violated the sovereignty of Syria by launching a rocket attack on a multi-story residential building in a densely populated area of Damascus. According to the Syrian authorities, 7 civilians were killed, including women and children. 11 people were injured. The debris is being analyzed now. We strongly condemn this action. Whoever was the target of the attack, it was committed on the territory of a third country, in a dense residential development, which leads to inevitable casualties among innocent people. And it is outrageous that such actions have literally turned into a routine practice applied to Syria, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip. We once again urge the Israeli side to respect the sovereignty of states and respect the basic norms of international law. We draw attention to the extremely irresponsible, dangerous nature of the committed act of aggression, which clearly shows the desire to further expand the geography of armed escalation in the region. The situation around Ukraine. The Kiev regime continues terrorist attacks against Russian regions, against Russian citizens. From the 30th of September to the 7th of October, the Banderites subjected Gorlovka to daily shelling and barrel artillery. They used exclusively NATO shells of 155 mm caliber, cluster munitions and drones. In total, over 200 shots were fired in the city. Several dozen drones were launched. Unfortunately, there are victims. 4 people were killed, including a teenager born in 2007 year. 45 people were injured, including 2 teenagers born in 2007, a girl born in 2015. An egregious case occurred in the Nikitovsky district of Gorlovka, where a drone attacked a shuttle bus standing at a bus stop. 8 of its passengers were injured of moderate severity. The Petrovsky district of Donetsk is also suffering from shelling, which is being purposefully fired at from enemy artillery. October 3rd, the APU attempted to attack the Kursk nuclear power plant. They did it with the help of drones, which was suppressed by means of electronic warfare. And on the 4th of October, as you know, the head of the Security Pass Group of the Zaporozhye Nuclear Power Plant Security Department, the former chairman of the Energodar City Council of Deputies, Andriy Korotky, was killed as a result of a car explosion in the city of Energodar. According to investigators, an improvised explosive device was placed under the vehicle. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, which published footage of the car bombing and posted a cynical statement about what they call retaliation, actually took responsibility for organizing the execution of this next barbaric terrorist attack. What else does the world community need to understand who they are dealing with, who they have nurtured, who they have raised? Bandera members are trying with all their might to intimidate the population of the Belgorod region and threatening its residents with an artillery strike and drone attacks. The 30th of September, the 6th of October of this year, arrivals along Shebekino were again recorded. 3 residents were injured. On the 2nd of October, the UPU used an unmanned aerial vehicle in the village of Tishanka. A man and a woman were injured there. On September 30th, in the village of Krepivny, a man was killed by Bandera attacks. 4 people were injured, including 2 girls of 14 and 3 years old. On the same day, 2 trucks were destroyed by drones on the Belgorod-Volokhanovka highway. The driver of one of them was killed. The second was injured. October 2nd, as a result of the shelling of an agricultural enterprise in the village of Yasny Zori, 1 civilian was killed, previously 16 people. October 4th, the Viso drone wounded 8 people in the village of Novaya, this is Volzhanka, 4 people in the village of Chermoshnoi and on the Chermoshnaya-Nikolskaya road. October 7th, as a result of drone strikes, injured drivers of agricultural machinery, a civilian car in the village of Novostroevka Pravaya and on the Nikolskaya Murom road. October 5th, Ukrainian drones tried to attack several civilian enterprises of the Voronezh region. 1 person was injured. Well, now about the atrocities of Bandera and foreign mercenaries of the Kursk region. The investigative authorities continue to work with a huge array of data on numerous war crimes committed by militants and Sioux and foreign mercenaries of the Kursk region. The testimony of miraculously surviving residents of one of the settlements of the region about the shooting of a civilian car by Bandera and the murder of a drone of a married couple trying to evacuate was received. The investigative committee of Russia has opened a criminal case on the murder of 2 women and a man in the Sachansky district. The suspects are Bandera members from the 41st Separate Mechanized Brigade and the 103rd Separate Brigade of the Territorial Defense of Ukraine. The investigative committee of Russia is also investigating Ukrainian nationalists from the 22nd and 61st Separate Mechanized Brigades and the 80s of a separate airborne assault brigade involved in the shelling of an evacuation point in the Bolshisoldetsky district, as a result of which residential buildings, cars and social infrastructure facilities were damaged, as it became known to the media from the attached helmet of one of the liquidated Ukronizist video cameras by Russian servicemen. Footage of the shooting of civilians by militants in a residential building of one of the villages of the region was found, not far from the body of the criminal, and SUV was found, and inside gold jewelry. Presumably, the find is related to this murder. A captured Ukrainian terrorist said that residential buildings were turned into firing points in the settlements of the Kursk region in the USU. Civilians were killed in accordance with the orders of the command, which demanded to shoot civilians on the spot and give everything away for the alleged atrocities of the Russian troops. But they worked out the butch then and received worldwide applause from Western countries. And now Western journalists are asking the Russian side, in particular Sergei Lavrov at a press conference, why do you always remember the trouble? Let's remember it. How can we forget it? Because more by itself arose for a reason. This is a tracing paper from how the Nazis acted during the Second World War. For us, the Great Patriotic War, when similar provocations were arranged in the cities that the Red Army left, which were allegedly issued for the brutality of Soviet soldiers. And after the Butch, the same scenarios are now being played out in Kursk. The materials of the Ukronizist massacres of civilians in the Kursk region were provided by the Russian side to the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. A timely substantive reaction should follow. And this and other relevant international structures on the atrocities committed by Bandera, both Bandera and foreign mercenaries, are deliberately hunting for civilians, precisely understanding and being aware of who they are aiming at. And it doesn't matter to them that a child, a woman, an elderly person may suffer from their hands. These are terrorists. These are people who are deliberately engaged in killing civilians. Actually realizing the essence of the Zelensky regime, the above crimes are on the conscience of the Kiev clique. I would say if she had this conscience, it is simply their responsibility and punishment will follow. It is also the responsibility of their Western masters. Russian law enforcement agencies record every crime. All those involved will answer to the fullest extent of the law. Now, as a matter of fact, about how this law is implemented in practice, Russian courts, based on the evidence of the Investigative Committee of Russia, continue to sentence Ukrainian Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes. On October 1st, the Supreme Court of the DPI sentenced in absentia mercenaries from Finland, Israel Arima, and a foreman, to 14 to 10 years in prison for participating in hostilities on the side of Ukraine. The 1st of October, the Supreme Court of the DPI sentenced the militants of the AFU Kutusev, Breko, Potapov. They are not guilty of the murder of 2 civilians of Mariupol in April of the 22nd year. Potapov and Breko received 28, Kutusev 29 years in prison. On October 2nd, the Investigative Committee of Russia sent a criminal case to the court against the commanders of the armed forces of Klimbit on charges of organizing a terrorist attack on November 9th of the 23rd year. We are talking about a strike by 2 rockets of the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system on the city of Skadovsk, Kherson region. As a result, 10 people were killed, and 1 of them was injured. Among the dead are officers of the investigative bodies of Russia. They were working to establish the circumstances of the crimes of the Kiev regime. Kalimbet is on the international wanted list. On October 7th, the Moscow City Court sentenced the American mercenary Hubbard to 6 years and 9 months in prison for participating in the Territorial Defense Battalion of Ukraine. And now about what kind of activities NATO is carrying out. On the 3rd of October, the newly minted Secretary General of the North Atlantic Alliance, Mark Ryut, made a blitz visit to Kiev, literally from the threshold. He hastened to assure his Ukrainian wards of the immutability of the alliance's course. For comprehensive support, ritually promised to help as much as it was needed, as they say. To the last Ukrainian, he assured that Ukraine was closer than ever, Lutz said, to NATO, and in every possible way played along with the Zelensky regime on camera on the issue of using Western long-range weapons to strike deep into Russia. He supported this with the thesis that the direct quote of Kiev's right to self-defense, he said, does not end at the border. However, at the same time, he limited himself to such statements and referred to the fact that the alliance does not have the authority to give such permission because it belongs, Ryut said, to the competence of individual countries of the bloc that supply such types of weapons to the armed forces of Ukraine. Zelensky, in his style, turned on a broken record with a plea to accelerate the supply of strike missiles, systems and other military products to cover the urgent, as he formulated, needs of the Kiev regime in the combat zone. He promised to continue to promote his now victory plan. Remember, there was a peace plan, now a victory plan. In my opinion, Zelensky wrote 2 extra letters there. This is a disaster plan for him. He said that he expects encouraging results of the upcoming meeting of the contact group on Ukraine in the Ramstein format on October 12th, with the participation of the US President and the NATO leadership. But the US President will shine at this meeting as usual, drew attention to the revelation of the former Agent Secretary Stoltenberg, I mean the Secretary General of NATO. He noted these thoughts with his own, giving relevant comments to the Financial Times on October 4th. All this was published. In particular, he admitted that in exchange for admission to NATO, Ukraine could give up the territories lost during the conflict. You know, I'm just wondering, but before that, such a thought had not visited Westerners. After all, they are exactly them, not someone else, not representatives of the world majority. No, I don't know. Representatives of some political science circles, namely Westerners, namely NATO members. Since 2022, Ukrainians have been inspired with the idea that they are literally obliged to continue fighting, refusing any form of negotiation, because Stoltenberg said it, Barrel said it was said in the White House on Downing Street, it was said in Berlin and Paris and other NATO capitals, because that only from the words of the West, the fate of not only Ukraine should be decided on the battlefield, but, as they said, the outcome of the events should be decided in general. This is their ideology. Now, you see, Stoltenberg has other thoughts. As an example, Stoltenberg cited Finland, which, after the war, the USSR ceded 10% of its territory, but received a secure border. However, Stoltenberg forgot to mention the active participation of the Finns in the fighting on the side of Hitler's Germany, and their desire to regain their lost lands. But it is just considering that they rewrote history. Apparently now they believe in some kind of nano or neo or quasi-history. With all these arguments, there is a recent tendency to discuss the possibility of granting the Kiev regime membership in NATO in the foreseeable future. A similar idea has already been expressed recently by the British ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Now Stoltenberg has picked it up. As we can see, apparently, Washington, London, and Brussels are skeptical about the potential of the armed forces of Ukraine and, in fact, are working on various scenarios to avoid the military and political collapse of the Zelensky regime, in which they have invested so much. However, the West forgets that one of the main reasons for the outbreak of the conflict was precisely his obsessive desire to drag Ukraine into the alliance, to turn it into a springboard for confrontation with Russia. In the same row, there are massive violations of the rights of the Russian-speaking population, the cultivation of aggressive nationalism, which has turned into neo-Nazism. Without eliminating these root causes of the crisis, it is simply impossible to achieve a just settlement. As the Russian leadership has repeatedly said, achieving sustainable and long-term peace in Ukraine is unrealistic without fixing its neutral non-aligned status, eradicating Nazism, chauvinism in this country, and repealing all discriminatory laws. And now about what I'm ready to throw on the altar of my own ambitions for my own salvation. Zelensky. About the Ukrainian mobilization. Against the background of increasing losses of the armed forces in Ukraine, a bidirectional process of forced mobilization and mass desertion of Ukrainians is growing. Zelensky's regime invents additional ways to replenish reserves for further utilization of the male part of the able-bodied population of Ukraine. The government of Ukraine has reduced the deadline for appearance at the military enlistment office on the agenda from 14 to 7 days for residents of regional centers and 10 for residents of other settlements. A bill has been submitted to the Verkhovna Rada obliging conscripts at the age of 17 to register for military service. Under the threat of penalties, the document also provides for the inclusion of women who have undergone basic military training in the ranks of military service. According to Ukrainian media reports, there is a growing opinion among the deputies of the Verkhovna Rada in favor of further reducing the mobilization age in Ukraine to 20 years. The reason for this was the letters of American congressmen. American congressmen were outraged that the Kiev regime does not call Ukrainians younger than 25 years. This is not a double standard. This is not cynicism. This is a perversion. When a country located on another continent uses a state that coexisted in peace, interaction, in cooperation with its neighbors, as a tool for implementing its geopolitical manipulations, and does it in such a way that it inspires the inhabitants of this country that they should die, because this is their historical vocation and mission to supposedly protect the West from Russia. This is already not just sick fantasies. This is not just a kind of painful philosophy anymore. This is a perversion. What does all this mean? That the fate of the citizens of Ukraine is not controlled by Ukrainian politicians, who were elected by the citizens of Ukraine. Their fate is controlled directly from overseas. It's American congressmen there who have no idea what Ukraine is, what Ukrainian culture and history are, what true, deep, real Ukrainian traditions are. Now, they are calling for everything to be done to reduce the mobilization age in Ukraine to 20 years. What does this really mean? American congressmen dream of simply mowing down Ukrainians as a nation, as an ethnic group, as a culture. They did not succeed with Russia, although they really wanted to cancel it. Now, they are starting to cancel Ukraine right up to the very end. Do you need any more proof of who started all this? We need some evidence of who has made a whole chain of provocations and manipulations on the territory of Ukraine in order to ignite this fire. No proof is needed. This is Washington, this is London, and this is collective Brussels. Well, by the way, it's not enough for them to cancel Ukraine as a whole now. They still continue to struggle with the Russian language. Look at this, the practice of strangling the rights of Russian speakers, especially the use of the Russian language, continues in Ukraine, according to the media. A bill has been submitted to the Verkhovna Rada to ban the use of the Russian language in schools in the extracurricular process. Well, I think that the next bill will be devoted to the prohibition of thinking in Russian. And after it, a bill will be introduced to ban thinking in principle in any language. Another stupidity was noted by the Commissioner for the Protection of the State Language, Kremen, who took the initiative to destroy the Russian version of the keyboard for every computer in Ukraine. The Russian language is literally like a bone in the throat for the Kiev junta, but the truth is that they are paid well in the West for this. The Kiev regime is going out of its way not only to eradicate it, but also to make it stop talking, stop thinking. But we are talking about millions of Ukrainians, but nothing comes of it, no matter what. Yes, we are fighting Bandera. Our people are fighting on the front line there. But at the same time, we hear what is being heard from the trenches on the other side, including Russian speech, Russian. Do you think all these laws will work when people, at a critical moment of life and death for themselves, in fact continue to speak and think in Russian, despite the fact that at this very moment they have an order to kill Russians? What are these laws aimed at? They are aimed at pitting people even more. As if it's all oriented to some distant future, to lay-time mines. And it's like the opposite is happening. Russian is preferred by an increasing number of Ukrainian residents because Russians cannot be destroyed, and because perhaps, I do not know, maybe that's also why they are beginning to understand somewhere deep down what those who have so cruelly deceived them in the West have done to them. These facts once again confirm the urgent tasks of a special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, eliminate threats emanating from its territory, and, as the Russian leadership has stated, all of them will be fulfilled, and also about the confirmation of the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime. According to incoming information, the Malian justice has launched an investigation into the circumstances of the cooperation of the Kiev authorities with terrorist organizations that operate on the territory of the Sahara region, as you know, at the end of July. And we commented on this. Terrorists, most of whom belonged to the pro-Al-Qaeda group supporting Islam and Muslims, attacked a convoy of the Malian armed forces near the village of Tinzuatin on the border with Algeria. Then the press secretary of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Yusuf, and the ambassador of Ukraine to Senegal, Pivovarev, directly expressed support for the actions of the jihadists. Such behavior of representatives of the Kiev regime did not go unnoticed. As you remember, again, Obamacare and the non-mayors broke off diplomatic relations with Ukraine. The ambassador of Ukraine in Dakar was summoned to the Ministry of Senegal, where he was presented, in order to draw the attention of the international community to the fact of Kiev's support for international terrorism, and to take appropriate measures. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso initiated their own judicial investigation on August 20th to establish all those involved in the attack on the Malian military, including the organizers, including the sponsors of this terrorist attack. In the future, the information obtained could be used when applying to international courts. It is very likely that during the proceedings, there will be data on other foreign actors who have been interacting with jihadist movements in the Sahel region for a long time, as well as financing anti-government activities directed against the states of the region. We believe that the competent Ukrainian authorities will establish the entire chain of contacts that connect the Ukrainian special services with terrorist organizations affiliated with ISIS, Band, and Al-Qaeda. Once again, we draw attention to the duplicitous policy from the West. In words, as you can see, they are worried, they advocate, they worry about joining forces in the fight against the terrorist threat, in particular in Africa. But in fact, they shy away from condemning the Kiev regime, which is ready to collude with radical groups for the sake of harming African countries friendly to Russia. We will continue to draw the attention of the world community, including through the structures of the United Nations, to the terrorist nature and actions of Kiev on the impulse of stability and security on the African continent. Well, to the question of how it all relates to history, to the history of the Second World War. 15 years ago, it was decided to erect a monument to the victims of communism in the Canadian capital. It was ready to open a year ago. The solemn ceremony was postponed indefinitely after a truly global, international scandal, with ovations to former SS member Yaroslav Gunka. Let me remind you, the Canadian Parliament gave him a standing ovation. We decided to wait, so that, as they say, apparently, not to get into another dirty story. And it turns out that Jewish organizations, for example, the Simon Wiesenthal Friends Center, back in 2021 year, pointed out to local officials that among the victims, specific victims of communism, and there are 553 of them immortalized on the monument, there may be Nazis. Actually, that's what happened. Why are you surprised? I think you shouldn't be surprised, because after all, it was Canada that sheltered tens of thousands of Nedobitkov Bandera, other so-called veterans, in fact collaborators from the SS Division Galicia, after the Second World War. The media, journalists found out that private donations were made to the Memorial Fund for the inclusion of the names of the Hauptmann of the Nagdigal Battalion, Roman Shukevich, the head of the Croatian Ustasha, Ante Pavelic. A more thorough check revealed that of the 533 victims marked on the memorial, more than half, about 330, could have been Nazis or Nazi collaborators. Officials admitted that among the people proposed for perpetuation were associated with the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the so-called Baltic nationalist groups, members of the Latvian SSS, who committed documented mass executions. The new scandal surrounding the odious monument is another illustration of the double standards and monstrous hypocrisy of the official Ottawa. Under the guise of the so-called victims of communism, Canadian politicians are trying to whitewash Nazi criminals, their henchmen, who were granted asylum on a massive or simplified basis after the Second World War. It is not by chance that among the sponsors of this most infernal memorial, which causes even the Canadian public a lot of questions, there are apologists of neo-Nazism and those who are trying to rewrite history and justify the atrocities of Hitler's executioners. By the way, it's a good idea, or maybe publish a list of all sponsors, so that the world community knows who sponsors the installation of monuments to the Nazis. I think it can be arranged. Now about the situation in Moldova. We continue to monitor the situation there. The authorities of this country, as Moldovans note with you, have turned the election campaign for the election of the President of the Republic and, accordingly, the European referendum into an anti-Russian, anti-Moldovan farce. On October 7th, the Central Election Commission of Moldova announced that instead of the previously planned 5 polling stations in Russia, only 2 will be opened. Both sites, given that 2 will be located, will be opened in Moscow. There will be 5,000 ballots on each one. Bulletins printed for polling stations in St. Petersburg, Surgut, Yaroslav. Where do you think they went? They were destroyed. Yes, it's such a lovely democracy, according to Sand. I remind you that the number of Moldovan diaspora in Russia, maybe Sandu does not know, according to various estimates, is up to 500,000 people. This is for 500,000. Mrs. Sandu has prepared 10,000 ballots. These are Moldovan citizens, and they have the right to vote. Was it Sandu for democracy? As far as I remember, for Euro values, which are based on elections, as the will of citizens. Or how many citizens are supposed to vote? What percentage of those eligible for the ballot out of the total number is obtained? In all previous elections, the Moldovan authorities opened about 20 polling stations for their citizens. It's only 2 now, a reduction of 10 times. It seems to me very comparable in general with the reduction of the rights and freedoms of Moldovan citizens on the territory of Moldova itself. Let's compare how they happen in other countries. There are a little more than 100,000 Moldovans in Italy, but it will be open for them. Well, let's fantasize. What do you think? How many 500,000 Moldovans have 2 sites opened in Russia? In Italy, 100,000 Moldovans, respectively. Well, in general, 0 plots can hardly be opened. Well, probably 1. 60 polling stations will be opened in Italy, and 236,000 ballots will be allocated. You say it can't be, because only 100,000 Moldovans are in Italy. Why 236,000 ballots? But because it's cheating. What exactly is the Sandu regime doing? Let me remind you that in the last elections, it was the electorate in Italy and other Western European countries that ensured the success of the current president, bringing about 26% of the votes. If only Moldovans living in Moldova had voted, the result would have been different. Both the figures and examples of cheating political techniques used by the Chisinau regime at the prompting of the West show the scale of the current government's uncertainty about victory, panic fear of defeat, a real attitude to democratic principles, and complete disrespect in principle for any democratic procedure. In fact, it is a disregard for the rights and freedoms of its own citizens. Today, the official Chisinau unproven claims about the alleged hybrid threats from Russia. What are such interesting hybrid threats from Russia? That we are telling the truth, that we are giving figures. By the way, let them try to refute them. Well, then it will really have to be said that yes, somehow we made a mistake intentionally or not intentionally, but until the officials in Moldova refute our data, let them not stutter about some hybrid threats. Although, on the other hand, perhaps by a hybrid threat, they do not mean the true truth. And at the same time, They are doing everything to hide the numerous facts of Western interference in their electoral processes. What can we talk about if a number of Western structures, including the British Embassy, such non-governmental organizations as the Unity of the USA and Britain for International Development, USEAT, Kate, appear on the title page of the official website of the Central Election Commission of Moldova? Can you imagine? Is this a controlled territory or something? Is this a semi-colony? What is it? What kind of racism is this against a sovereign state? Usually, sponsors are generally indicated in this way at some events or invitations to some events. It is not surprising that the ambassadors of the USA, France, and Britain are welcome permanent guests in the Moldovan Central Election Commission. They're not even guests, they're more like hosts. In parallel, Western politicians and functionaries continue to visit Moldova, openly agitating for a certain European choice. October 4th, in Chisinau, Romanian Prime Minister Marcel Ciulacu called on the Moldovan leadership to work more actively, so that citizens who accept the status clearly understand that Moldova's future is in the EU. Well, what was he ashamed of? That's what he'd say to a dude. Not in the EU, but in Romania. They are trying to achieve this. Russia, according to him, a direct quote, will lead the country to isolation, poverty, of course, naturally. Now we see how the European Union is flourishing. The absurdity of such statements is that, as history shows, it was the Romanian occupation of 1918-1940s that brought poverty, ruin, depopulation, mass shootings to Bessarabia. And being part of the Russian Empire, being part of the USSR, was marked by the prosperity of Moldova. Again, this is all proven by facts, figures, and real data. The total cleansing of the information space of the Republic by the Moldovan authorities continues. On the 30th of September, the license was revoked from the prime and public TV channels. On the 2nd of October, access to the popular Russian platforms Rutube, Yandex, Zen was blocked. Yandex music services have stopped working. In addition, two Moldovan websites of the MD24 internet news portal were banned. Users in Moldova note that even Russian cartoons have already been unavailable for viewing. Three Cats, Smeshariki, but this is probably a blow to sand in general. It seems to me the uncertainty of the Moldovan authorities in their own positions is so great that they see a security threat. Even in animated films for children, a distinctive feature of the current election campaign was the blatant politicization of the language issue. In the 20th year, Sandu promised to be, a direct quote, the president for all citizens of the country, end quote. But in reality, what happened? On October 5th, the Moldovan SEC pointed out the inadmissibility, direct quote, of using languages other than the state language. Well, in general, everyone understands what language we are talking about, Russian. So it is impossible to use any language other than the state language by political parties when interacting with public authorities. End quote. October 7th, the national company Teleradio Moldova announced the possibility of addressing the participants of the presidential race to the electorate in the language of national minorities during TV debates for only 1 minute. It is obvious that all these are links in the same chain of discrimination against Russian-speaking residents of Moldova, the division of society into so-called trustworthy and not so reliable. The oppression of opposition politicians and presidential candidates continues. On the 2nd-3rd of October, the leadership of the pro-government TV channel Magazine TV assisted two of Sandu's opponents in publishing their election videos under the pretext of criticism of the ruling forces of Moldova contained in their materials. But you know, the laws of democracy are such that opponents cannot be scolded. You can probably only praise them. Nevertheless, despite the political monopoly, complete cover-up with the West, the Sandu regime has signed in powerlessness. He is powerless in attempts to manage his anti-ratings not only inside the country, but also abroad. Over the past week, anti-government rallies of the Moldovan diaspora swept through Italian Turn, Irish Dublin, German Dortmund, Dusseldorf. It is obvious that the tactics of unwinding the non-existent so-called Russian threat, including the unfounded accusation of our country in attempts to organize a coup in Moldova, do not work. People don't believe. People see what Sandu is doing. Cancels the Moldovan language, rewires Moldovans, turns Moldova into Romania. Everyone sees it. The citizens of Moldova know all this, and the people of the country see the right anti-people, meaning the real background of its policy, the policy of Sandu. And this is an anti-people policy. This policy has failed itself. Because people have understood what is hidden behind these slogans, behind these memes, behind these mottos, and allegedly Europeanism. In fact, they are being pushed literally into colonial dependence. They are being pushed to abandon themselves, not to mention their own history. Residents of the country also see the catastrophic reality in which the so-called Euro course of the current Chisinau regime has dragged on. People see this and draw conclusions. And about Romania, an official notification was received from the Romanian side, according to which the Consulate General of Romania and Rostov-on-Don ceases its activities on October 14th, with the function of providing consular services under the corresponding obrug transferred to the embassy of this country in Moscow. This step is due to the decision of the Russian side to denounce the bilateral intergovernmental agreement on the opening of the mentioned consular institution. It was adopted, this decision was made in December of the 23rd year, as a response to the unfriendly actions of the Romanian authorities, and also from the classics of liberalism. The British Themis is once again raped by the British political establishment. The fact is that the resolution of the Secretariat of the Public Investigation into the death of the British woman Dawn Rogers, let me remind you, 2000 and the 18th year of Amesbury, has been published. Regarding the format of Sergei and Yulia Skripal's participation in the hearings scheduled for October, everyone who saw this resolution, after they stopped laughing, was horrified by the twist and mockery of the legality of those who call themselves Britain Pravoviki. Look, the chairman of the investigation, Hughes, decided not to involve the Skripals in meetings either in person or remotely. Instead, the protocols of the Skripals' communication with the British police will be used to reconstruct the picture of what happened. Well, here you can probably say that the questionnaire was sent to the Skripals in the 24th year. Oh no, the protocols will be used old, from 2000 of the 18th year. Their written answers to questions will also be used as part of the current public inquiry by the Sturgis family. Hughes argues his decision by saying that the personal appearance of the Russians in the courtroom or the organization of a conference call will allegedly entail a threat to their physical security. Allegedly, there are grounds to believe that an attack similar to the one that took place in Salisbury will be repeated, as it was said, and it can be committed by persons, a direct quote, having the same motives as the attackers in 2018, or a direct quote sharing their intended purpose. I would like to ask the question, who are these people? Since 2018, how many years have already passed? 6. Someone British Themis identified as responsible for the attack. The statement of the representative of the British investigative authorities, soaked in Russophobia, indicates that the upcoming hearings will be not just biased, but, well, I do not know, some kind of clowning. This is politicization. This is a lack of transparency and a predetermined outcome of the case. It is not necessary to count on the triumph of justice in these conditions, of course. Circus. In one word, there is a persistent desire of London to prevent the Skripals from appearing in public. Everything is being done for this. Even such absurd pretexts are being invented. The concealment of Russians by the British side violates the legitimate right of our country to receive information about its citizens. We will continue to demand from the British the submission of exhaustive, objective information about the provocation they inspired in Salisbury in 2018 year, the fate of our compatriots, ensuring consular access to them, in accordance with the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963 year, and the Bilateral Consular Convention of 1965 year. I'm just wondering, what kind of logic is this? In other words, it turns out from the point of view of British justice or law enforcement agencies, if certain actions have been committed against some people that threaten life or health, then these people can no longer appear in public in any way. Or what? Or they have signed that they cannot provide for the West. What kind of justification is this? And, by the way, we need to see if there was anything at all similar to the name taken earlier. A very important date. This year marks the 80 years since the liberation of Riga by Soviet troops from Nazi troops from occupation during the Riga operation. It took place on the 14th of September, the 22nd of October, 1944 year. During the Great Patriotic War, Latvia became one of the first Soviet republics to be completely captured by the Nazis. In July 1941, control over this region allowed the German fleet to operate in the eastern part of the Baltic, to maintain contact with the Scandinavian countries, which supplied strategic materials to the Third Reich. On the 14th of September, 1944, with powerful artillery and air support, the Riga operation began. The troops of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Baltic fronts took part in it in cooperation with the Baltic Fleet. The 130th Latvian Rifle Corps fought as part of the 2nd Baltic Front. On the morning of the 13th of October, the right bank part of Riga was liberated. On the 15th of October, the whole city. As the head of the political department of the 43rd Guards Latvian Rifle Division wrote, a direct quote, "Nowhere did the population meet more warmly than in Riga. The townspeople greeted the soldiers and officers with flowers, red flags, and not quotes." As a result of the Riga operation, Soviet troops defeated the main forces of Army Group North and, having advanced up to 150 kilometers, liberated most of Latvia. By order number 194 of the Supreme Commander of the 13th of October, 1944, the troops who participated in the liberation of the capital of the Latvian USSR, the city of Riga, from the Nazi invaders, were thanked, and Moscow was given. In Moscow, a salute was given with 24 artillery volleys from 324 guns. The units that distinguished themselves in the battles of the formations were awarded the honorary name of Riga. 139 people were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union for carrying out this operation. On the website of the Russian Historical Society, published materials provided by the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation on the liberation of the occupied territory of Latvia by the Nazis. Unfortunately, we state that the current Latvian government wants to completely forget those who liberated the country from Nazism. Official Riga has taken a purposeful course to falsify the history of the Second World War, the glorification of Nazi accomplices. Today, not only memorials in memory of the Soviet wars of liberation, but also any reminders of Russian culture, are being destroyed in this country. Teaching in Russian is prohibited, but everything is as usual when society is struck by neo-Nazism, despite all the attempts of the Latvian authorities to abandon the common historical past. Russia will always remember and cherish the memory of Soviet soldiers who liberated the capital of Latvia and made a significant contribution to the victory over the common enemy. And not to divide people by nationality, not to segregate them, not to push aside photos, awards and data of those who were indigenous to Riga, Latvia. No, for us it is also a hero who fought with our ancestors together against the brown plague. October 7th marks the 22nd anniversary of the signing of the Stowe Charter. Let me remind you that it was adopted on the basis of the decisions of the Collective Security Council of the organization. On May 14th, 2002 years on giving the Collective Security Treaty the status of an international regional organization. A detailed comment on this topic was posted on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. Let me remind you that the history of the Stowe keeps its report on the conclusion of the treaty, reports, begins its history on the conclusion of the Collective Security Treaty. It was signed in Tashkent on the 15th of May, 1992 year, and currently the organization includes Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, in accordance with Article 3 of the Charter. The objectives of the UCP are to strengthen peace, international regional security, stability, and the collective protection of the independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of the member states. The document defines the following principles that guide the organization in its activities: the priority of political means over the military, strict respect for independence, voluntary participation, equality of rights and obligations of the member states, non-interference in matters falling under the national jurisdiction of the member states. A vivid confirmation of the maturity and effectiveness of the STO was the complex actions of the countries of the association to assist the Republic of Kazakhstan in stabilizing the internal political situation in January of the 22nd year. Based on the experience of this peacekeeping operation, the leader of the MEDU of the member states of the investigation made a number of important decisions to improve the organization's crisis response system, the further development of the CSTO's potential, and the deepening of allied cooperation between the 6 fraternal countries. Within the framework of the unification remains a priority of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation, and the development of the peacekeeping component is the most important direction of the evolution of the organization. Its further existence, the necessary conditions are being formed for the connection of the structure to United Nations peace operations. And taking into account the accumulated experience of the STO, the Russian side considers this structure as a single lock for the formation of a new continental security architecture in Eurasia, free from external dictates, which is designed to unite the efforts of leading regional states and associations. And, as a matter of fact, for the Foreign Ministry, an extremely important date is the 14th of October. GEMO on this day will celebrate the 80th anniversary of its foundation. Anticipating this significant date, I would like to note that for the past 80 years, GEMO has served as the main forge of personnel for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Its graduates form the backbone of the Russian deep services, occupy senior positions both in the central office and in our foreign countries' institutions. At the same time, the education received by MGIMO is traditionally versatile, so MGIMO students work fruitfully, not only on the foreign policy path, but also in other areas of the civil service, as well as in business, the corporate sector, science, journalism, and many other professional fields, both in our country and abroad. In particular, among the graduates of the university are President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev, President of Kazakhstan Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The merits of the university in training highly qualified international specialists have been appreciated by the President of the Russian Federation. For high achievements in scientific and pedagogical activity, the head of state signed a decree on awarding the MGIMO team with the Order of Alexander Nevsky on September 18th of this year. Various thematic events, conferences, naturally and sports competitions are dedicated to the 24th anniversary year. For all MGIMO residents, alumni meetings are held in different countries of the world. A documentary about the university has been filmed. The premiere is expected in October on Channel 1. It is based on interviews with famous graduates who share their impressions of their studies at Alma Mater. There is also an interview with one well-known head of the foreign policy department of our country. We will not reveal all the cards. We will definitely watch this movie ourselves. A high-level conference on sustainable development and security in the Eurasian space, held at the end of September, on the initiative of the President of Russia, was timed to coincide with the 80th anniversary of MGIMO, on the initiative of the President of Kazakhstan, but with the support, of course, of our country, the Russian Federation. The central festive event of the upcoming anniversary is intended to be a gala evening in the Great Hall of the Moscow Conservatory. It will be created on the 14th of October, and I think the announcement will be noticeable in the public cultural life of the Russian capital. They do not congratulate us in advance, but we are doing everything to ensure that our university, which we appreciate, love, and return endlessly in our minds, meets this holiday at the highest level. And one more announcement. This is an announcement related to our colleagues from the Ministry of Health, their events, but international. Therefore, as a matter of fact, I would like to appeal to international journalists and foreign journalists. On the 10th-12th of October, the Second International Congress will be held at the National Medical Research Center of Endocrinology of the Ministry of Health.